Tonight on Bridge City News, a special memorial is taking place beginning tomorrow night to honor a prominent First Nations leader, Jason Goodstriker. Former Harper Cabinet Minister Rona Ambrose took to Facebook to announce whether or not she'll be seeking the federal Tory leadership. And 3 American firefighters died after the water bomber they were flying in crashed in Australia.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. As we reported on Bridge City News, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney is considering either shutting down or moving the supervised consumption sites in our province. A recent panel report suggested that crime has gone up by quite a bit in communities where the drug sites are located. A spokesperson for the Lethbridge Needle Crisis Support Group weighs in on the controversy.
I think it's a step in the right direction, honestly. I think it's great that we've finally been heard after all this time. Somebody is listening, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what else he has to lay out for his whole plan. I absolutely think we need detox and rehab and other rehabilitation forms here, and I support that 100%. And I think we could maybe even entwine a supervised injection site in there somewhere, but we can't do that without all the rest of the supports.
We asked people in Lethbridge if the supervised consumption and injection site downtown is helpful or harmful to our community.
I think that it's definitely a very controversial topic, but definitely the relocation of the building will be positive on other citizens just because it's around a lot of local businesses. Some may be concerned of safety.
My spouse does work downtown around that area, and from what I've seen, I have absolutely been more concerned about her safety, especially when she's leaving later at night when it is dark. She's had to take extra precautions to watch what's going on around her vehicle before she enters it. She's had people try to get in the vehicle when she's been there. So it's a big concern for me.
I think the facility's useful in terms of giving people a safe place, but I don't think that it's addressing the concern in the community. There's still needles being found in the community. I don't think it's helping the people that it should be helping.
I think a lot of people like to look at people who are addicted to drugs sometimes as if they're not people. And because of that, that means they don't care about them, they just want to sweep them aside. Actually, I think it causes more problems just with, if they're not doing it somewhere safe, then they're doing it somewhere not just where it's not safe for them, but where it's not safe for us, and say our children or anything like that. And so I think it's really good that there's somewhere that they can do that and be taken care of as human beings.
A 12-member jury took 3.5 hours to find a 54-year-old man from Raymond guilty on 4 counts of sexual assault and incest. The assaults took place between 2013 and 2018 when the girl was between the ages of 9 and 13. The girl, her mom, police, and family members all took the stand last week describing the incidents that occurred in the family's homes, the father's truck, and in a trailer while camping. He has been remanded into custody and is awaiting his sentencing hearing in April. In Canada, incest carries a minimum 5-year sentence, while sexual assault of a minor carries a minimum 1-year sentence. Police in Coaldale wrapped up their investigation into a fatal collision which occurred on November 25th on Highway 3 near Colehurst. The accident involved a VW Jetta and a Ford Escape. Police say the driver of the Escape, a 66-year-old woman from Colehurst, was pronounced dead at the scene. 36-year-old Wesley Brian Phillips faces various charges including impaired driving, dangerous operation of a vehicle, and failure to comply with a probation order. The Gleason RCMP are looking for a 15-year-old who's been missing since January the 11th. Police say Chance Reedleather was last seen in Calgary wearing a white hoodie, black bomber jacket, black jeans, red running shoes, and a New York Yankees ball cap. He's Indigenous, 5 foot 10 inches tall, around 150 pounds, slim build, with short dark brown hair and brown eyes. If you've seen Chance, call Crime Stoppers right away at 1-800-222-8477. A memorial for a prominent Alberta First Nations leader will take place tomorrow. Jason Goodstriker, the former regional chief for the Assembly First Nations in Alberta, died last week in Slave Lake. The 47-year-old also served as councillor for the Blood Tribe and was a member of a panel tasked with finding a fair deal for the province within the country. An all-night wake for Goodstriker is set to begin at 7 p.m. tomorrow night with a service to follow at 10 a.m. Saturday at the University of Lethbridge. Recent reports warn of increasingly deteriorating conditions around the world in the face of global warming. Alberta's challenge is how do we transition away from an economy based heavily on hydrocarbon production without increasing social tension and job losses? Bruce Wilson, who is an engineer and a former GM of Shell, has an idea.
To reimagine itself, I'll use the example of hydrogen as a technology that is a good adjunct to the oil and gas industry and can create the kind of jobs that Alberta is looking for. I think it has to happen in the context of an economy of well-being where we no longer look at simply GDP as a metric for understanding the health of our societies, but we actually look at other well-being metrics.
The energy sector accounts for almost 30% of Alberta's GDP. Henderson Lake will be a busy place next weekend as the law enforcement torch run polar plunge for the Special Olympics will be taking place. On February 1st, more than 40 plungers will brave the freezing waters in support of the athletes. The event gets underway at 11 a.m. and the theme this year is superheroes. Last year, the polar plunge raised more than $180,000 with 450 plungers participating in 5 cities. This year, the goal is $250,000. To register yourself or a team, visit the Special Olympics website. The town of Coaldale is offering tax breaks to encourage people to serve as volunteer firefighters. The town is offering a $1,000 property tax rebate for those who want to help battle the blazes. Businesses that allow volunteers to respond to emergency calls while at work are eligible for a tax rebate of up to $2,000. Fire officials say the town has had a challenge maintaining a steady group of volunteers.
Volunteer fire departments sometimes struggle to attract volunteers and retain volunteers. The time demands are continually increasing, so there's a lot of burden that gets placed on volunteer firefighters because of the time they have to put in for training, responding on calls, taking courses. So it can be a lot for some people based on their home life as well. Businesses can actually qualify for up to $2,000 tax credit each year, again, based on hours, how many hours the volunteer firefighter responds during the day.
Coaldale currently has 31 firefighters, but has been trying to get that number up to around 40. Alberta's Auditor General is set to investigate how the province's orphan well problem has become so big. The province has been struggling to clean up 3,400 oil and gas wells left behind by bankrupt companies. There are another 9,400 inactive wells, and some worry can also be orphaned and leave taxpayers with a bill. The Auditor General's office says it will look into whether the province is doing enough to prevent wells from becoming orphaned. The owner of an oil refinery in Regina, where workers are locked out in a contract dispute, says bargaining will not resume as long as union members continue to block access to the plant. Unifor's national president, Jerry Diaz, says Federated Cooperatives is moving the goalposts when it comes to what conditions need to be met to resume talks. Diaz, who is meeting with Regina Police Chief, says he hopes a cooling-off period will urge the company back to the bargaining table. The former interim leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, Rona Ambrose, announced on her Facebook page that she will not be seeking the leadership of the CPC. The former Harper cabinet minister says she wants to focus on making a difference for the energy industry in the private sector.
Hi everyone, Rona Ambrose here. I want to thank you for all of your messages of encouragement and support to run for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. It is humbling to be considered at all because I love our party, I love the people in it, and I love our country. I have really struggled with the decision to return to political life. I loved my 13 years in public service as an MP, a minister, and especially as leader of this great party. But right now, I'm focused on making a difference through the private sector, creating policy and advocating for our energy sector to create jobs. And my work continues to ensure that all judges in Canada receive sexual assault law training. And the truth is, I love being back in Alberta.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is calling on his caucus to play nice as it faces a new minority House of Commons next week. Liberal MPs met in Ottawa earlier today. Trudeau says Canadians sent their elected officials a clear message to do better, and they must take that seriously.
When the House returns next week, the very first priority, as you know, will be moving forward on the ratification of the new NAFTA. We're also going to be moving forward on a number of other priorities Canadians shared with us over the past months and years. Strengthening gun control and banning military-style assault weapons. Strengthening Medicare, including more care providers, access to mental health, and national universal pharmacare. be fighting climate change by exceeding our current 2030 targets and developing a plan to achieve a net zero emissions economy by 2050. We will continue to work to get our resources to markets other than the United States and supporting hardworking families in our natural resource sectors who we know have been through tough years.
Multiple people opened fire outside a McDonald's in downtown Seattle last night. The incident left one person dead and 7 others injured. Police are looking for the suspects.
Did you guys open up the... You already know that we had a shooting here earlier in the 3rd and Pine, that is. What we've been able to determine now is that this was not a random incident. There were multiple people involved. There was a dispute that happened in front of the McDonald's. People pulled out guns, shots rang out, people ran in various directions, and as you know, we had multiple people that were injured. Based on the forensic information that we've got so far, as well as video, we were able to determine that multiple people involved as shooters, and we're trying to ferret out exactly other details that we can get at this point.
Authorities in Southern California say 4 people died when a small plane went down at an airfield. Firefighters found the plane burning on the east side of the airport, not far from one end of the runway. One witness said she saw the plane strike a fence during takeoff, turn over, and quickly catch fire. She said the aircraft got no more than 3 feet off the ground. There have been some casualties in Australia as firefighters continue to battle massive wildfires there. 3 American crew members died when a C-130 Hercules water tanker crashed while battling the blazes in southeastern Australia.
Tragically, this afternoon, shortly before 1:30 p.m., we lost contact with one of our large air tankers, a C-130 water bombing aeroplane. Tragically, there appears to be no survivors as a result of the crash down in the snowy Monero area. It's impacted heavily with the ground, and initial reports are that there was a large fireball associated with the impact of the plane as it hit the ground. All 3 occupants on board were US residents.
It's been quite a challenging day to try to access the site and to find out what we need to do to support the people that are involved.
Chinese authorities are locking down 3 cities that are home to more than 18 million people in an effort to contain the deadly coronavirus. So far, 17 people have died, all of them in China. Police, SWAT teams, and paramilitary troops guarded a train station where metal barriers blocked the entrances. In the capital, Beijing, authorities canceled major events indefinitely, including traditional temple fairs. Other cases have been reported in the U.S., Washington State, Japan, South Korea, and Thailand. The World Health Organization is meeting to determine whether or not the outbreak should be declared a global emergency. Many North Americans have decided to lose weight and lead a healthier lifestyle for 2020. But what about our pets? According to a recent story by People magazine, 50% of dogs are obese. As we hear in this next report, pet owners need to do more to help their pooches lose their pouches.
So we've been doing half their size for 18 years, and we always like to include pets. It's such an important cause because 55% of dogs are overweight or obese. So it's important that people are aware that they should be looking at their pet's weight because it has dramatic impacts on their health.
Yeah, so I work out at the Humane Society of Western Montana, and Pearl came in one day when she was very heavy and not doing very well, and I decided that day, after talking with our vet and everyone involved, I decided to take her home as a foster to try to help her lose some weight. She weighed 50 pounds. She was unable to walk more than about 4 or 5 steps before her legs would give out. So she had to be carried everywhere, but I brought her home and we just got started immediately on trying to help her.
I got Shorty from Pitiful Pups, a rescue in Oklahoma, and I walked into PetSmart to pick up a dog for someone else, and I saw a small dog rescue, and I just saw his little gray face, and he looked really miserable, so I just thought it was really cute, and I wanted him.
We loved these 2 stories because they're both rescue pets. Pearl is an older dog. It shows that you really can't, as the saying goes, you can teach an old dog new tricks. So as much as people might shy away from adopting a dog who might be overweight or have some health problems, this shows you can, and you can make a real big difference in a pet's life.
A team of Lego builders has moved into the TELUS World of Science building in Vancouver. The group used more than 500,000 Lego bricks to build the Towers of Tomorrow exhibition.
So this is Towers of Tomorrow. It's about some of the largest towers in the world, both today and planned for the future. At Science World, we're also bringing in a lot of community building. So no building is an island. They exist within the context of a city, within a community, within an ecosystem, and we're trying to emphasize all of those aspects of architecture and city planning. Well, once the kids come in and start building their own, all bets are off. Right now, what you see is what's come in for with the traveling exhibition, and we're putting up a whole bunch of our own. We're working right now on a scale model of the False Creek neighborhood, which includes a few dozen extra buildings. Letting your curiosity and your excitement run wild. There's no limit to what you can build with the Lego that we have here in the gallery for people to just play and build with, to imagine towers of their own creation, what their ideal community might look like. So we're looking at building not just the structures themselves, but the entire context, the cities, the communities, and the ecosystems that go along with it.
You know, I wonder if they offer those Lego slippers just in case you accidentally step on those Lego bricks. It was another spring-like day in the Windy City. The warmer temperatures will be around a little while longer. Complete weather details are on deck. We enjoyed lots of sunshine again today with warmer temperatures. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a look at our weather. Jeanette, those mild temperatures may be sticking around a little longer.
Yes, that is right, Hal. And look at those warm temperatures. In fact, we did finally reach those double digits. Today's high was 10, overnight low 4 degrees. And into tomorrow, look at that. We're going to be remaining right there at 11 degrees for tomorrow. Now, keep in mind, we're going to be having some windy conditions. Up to 70 kilometer per hour winds this evening are expected. And into tomorrow, up to 50 kilometers per hour there. Same thing for Saturday too, going to be seeing some wind there, but a high of 8 degrees, lots of sunshine, and into Sunday 4 degrees, so should be a lovely weekend. Into early next week, we're going to be seeing highs of 7 degrees on Monday, and Tuesdays and Wednesdays highs 6 degrees with a mix of sun and cloud. Pretty nice conditions, I would say. The average highs and lows this time of year, -2. The high, obviously, we're getting much higher than that. And the average low around -14. The high temperature on this day was recorded back in 2005. It was 16 degrees. And the chilliest day was in 1969. It was -43. The sun rose this morning at 8:16 a.m. and it set at 10 after 5 p.m. right when you're driving home from work. So just beware of that sunset glaring in your eyes as you're trying to make it up that west side hill. Looking into tomorrow's highs across the nation, the west coast will be experiencing some showers. Victoria's high 11 degrees, Vancouver 10 degrees, 1 degree expected in Edmonton, and 7 degrees in Calgary. So their conditions very similar to ours here in Lethbridge. Over in Saskatchewan, beautiful sunshine. -1 is expected in both Saskatoon and Regina. -6 is the high expected tomorrow in Winnipeg with increasing clouds over there. Now, looking further east, Toronto will see a high of 3 degrees, high of 2 over in Ottawa, and Montreal's high is 1 degree. Scattered clouds all throughout the region as they remain very even-keeled temperatures. Over into Atlantic Canada, Fredericton's high tomorrow will be -1. 1 degree expected in Halifax and -2 up in Charlottetown. Lots of scattered clouds. There's sunshine expected in St. John's, Newfoundland with a high of -2 as they continue to dig themselves out of that nasty blizzard that hit them last Friday. And there you go. That is your forecast.
The owner of greeting card retailers Carlton Cards and Papyrus is closing all of its stores in North America, including all 76 Canadian locations. Most of the store closures will take place over the next 4 to 6 weeks. Another 170 locations will close in the United States, bringing the total to 254 stores employing around 1,400 people. Sherman Retail Group CEO Dominic Sherman said the closures were a difficult decision. She said the company was unable to realign their stores to fit today's shopping environment. The Carlton and Papyrus online stores will remain open, although the Papyrus website said all sales were final. When January 31st rolls around, all 255 Sobeys stores across the country will no longer be offering plastic bags. Instead, the company will be switching to paper. The grocery store chain based in Nova Scotia made the elimination announcement in July of last year, calling it the first step in removing unnecessary plastic from all retail. Now, without plastic bags, customers will have to either bring in their own bags or purchase a paper bag for 10 cents. Sobeys, which is owned by Empire Company Limited, estimates the group will eliminate 225 million plastic bags, or just over 1,200 tons annually. There's a strong push to have Canada invest more in solar power and wind farms to help cut down on our global footprint. Cody Battershill is the founder of Action Canada, a grassroots organization that supports Canada's energy industry. Cody says green technology is good, but it's important not to put all of our eggs into the green basket.
As Albertans and as Canadians, we can be proud. Alberta had Canada's first wind farm in 1993. We're building Canada's largest solar farm right now. But wind and solar today is not ready, according to Bill Gates, because battery storage is not technologically feasible yet. So as long as the world needs oil and gas, which will be for decades to come, we have to choose if we want to support the best producer with the highest environmental standards, or if we want to bench Canada, and that only benefits other countries, and that is bad for the environment.
Watch the entire interview with Cody Battershill and BCN's Paul Arthur discussing the delicate balance between green technology and our energy industry, coming up after business news. There was a sell-off on international markets today as investors worry about that deadly virus outbreak in China, and it could continue spreading and hurting the global economy. Asian markets bore the brunt of the effects. Hong Kong's Hang Seng was down 1.5%, and the Shanghai Stock Exchange plunged 2.75%. North American markets were down to a lesser extent in late morning trading, but a slump in crude prices is weighing heavily on energy stocks. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down almost 22 points on the day to 17,621. The Dow was down 26 points to 29,160. The S&P 500 was up close to 4 points to 3325. The Nasdaq was up almost 19 points to 9402. Oil was down just over $1 to $55.70 per barrel. Natural gas was up 3 cents to $1.94. Gold was unchanged at $1562.94, and silver was also unchanged at $17.80 an ounce. Wheat is at $232 per metric ton. Barley's at $237. Canola's at $4.79, and corn is at $270 per metric ton. Live cattle was down $1.50 to $126.32. Feeder cattle were down $1.15 to $144.50. Lean hogs were up 95 cents to $69. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly on the day to 76.17 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, a memorial service for a prominent First Nations leader will take place tomorrow. The wake for Jason Goodstriker will go 7 p.m. on the Blood Reserve. A service will also take place this Saturday morning, 10 a.m. at the University of Lethbridge. All are welcome to attend. Goodstriker was the former regional chief for the Assembly of First Nations here in Alberta. He died last week in Slave Lake. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney says Ottawa needs to do more to prevent the flow of opioids from coming into our province. The Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, has details next. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News Community Calendar. Ready to take the plunge? Southern Albertans are invited to take part in this year's Polar Plunge in support of Special Olympics, taking place Saturday, February 1st at Henderson Lake Park from 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Every dollar raised goes towards more than 3,300 Special Olympic athletes representing 140 communities across Alberta. Registration is $50 and comes with a pair of Polar Plunge gloves. For more details and to register, visit specialolympics.ca/Alberta Polar Plunge. Night to Shine is an event sponsored by the Tim Tebow Foundation and hosted by My Victory Lethbridge on Friday, February 7th. Night to Shine is an unforgettable prom night experience for people with special needs, ages 14 and older. This complimentary event begins on a red carpet with guests receiving the royal treatment, including hair and makeup stations, limousine rides, a catered dinner, and much more. For details and to register, visit myvictory.ca. And if you'd like to volunteer, email carol@myvictory.ca. The Lethbridge Association of the Blind provides numerous activities for the blind and visually impaired in the Lethbridge area. These events include dinners with entertainment, theatrical performances, local museum tours, bowling, and much more. For more information or to volunteer, call 403-942-1677 or email brownwj@shaw.ca. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Alberta Premier Jason Kenney says supervised consumption sites across Alberta could be closed or relocated. Not for sure yet, but that's a possibility. He said the preliminary report revealed that there's a lot of crime and disorder around the sites. Many applaud his thoughts, while others, like Lethbridge West MLA Shannon Phillips, who lives in downtown Lethbridge, says the site has actually saved hundreds of people's lives. To talk more about it is Tyler Dawson. Tyler's the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, joining me from Edmonton. Tyler, some are applauding Kenny's comments, including business owners around the SES, while others, like Phillips, say shutting down the drug sites is not really a good idea.
Yeah, this controversy has come up a few times in different parts of Canada over the last few years. You saw a similar thing happen in Ontario when Premier Doug Ford took over a couple of years back, and you're seeing it again here. Now, the province of Alberta had embarked upon this study of supervised consumption sites, saying that it was going to look at the things that previous research hadn't, and that was sort of some of the crime issues that people talk about and some of the impacts on business that people talk about. So it I think was always maybe a given in some ways that some of these were going to move or close. But this was him, I think, telegraphing most clearly that there's going to be some changes here. And then it opens up a few other questions, such as what happens if they decide to close one, say in Calgary, for example, or Lethbridge. Is it possible that the city council could decide to fund these things? Now, in Ottawa, when Premier Doug Ford was looking at defunding some of them, closing some of them, the city of Ottawa said, well, we'll step in and we'll fund these at about $1 million a year is what they had sort of budgeted for there. So it's hard to say what this might mean longer term, whether or not these sites would be closing, whether or not they would be moving, whether or not we're talking alternative funding. Very much the ball is still with the provincial government at this point, and we'll see what happens over the next few months.
I'm wondering if municipalities do take it over, if that will impact property taxes as well, because I know Lethbridge City Council is, they're running a very fine line right now when it comes to finances. So
yeah, and all of the many municipalities in Alberta are as well, Calgary and Edmonton in a similar boat. I would perhaps hope that $1 million wouldn't totally break the bank in one of these cities, but gosh, you never know, I guess. So this is why I'm not an accountant or a bean counter, because I would have said, $1 million.
That's right. Chump change, right? Now, Premier Kenney also says Ottawa needs to do more to stop the import of opioids coming in from places like China. Tyler Kenney said that the Liberals made a big mistake when it eliminated minimum sentences for serious narcotic offences and illegal possessions of firearms. He says the recent gun violence in Calgary is related to criminal drug activity and drug gangs engaged in turf warfare.
Yeah, a whole bunch of different things happening in this stuff with Kenney this week. In that specific circumstance, yeah, he's saying that a lot of the violence problems in Western Canada are related to drugs, and a lot of those drugs are coming from China. And he pointed sort of specifically to the United States, which has sort of imposed some sanctions or considered imposing sanctions on China with regards to trying to shut down some of the manufacturers of these opioids in China. So certainly that is part of what Kenney is concerned about. Obviously, Alberta hit quite hard by the opioid crisis. And also the recent shootings, in particular, that he was talking about Calgary and a recent spate of gun violence there. So, I tend to think that these problems are, quite a bit more complicated, perhaps, than the importation of opioids. I mean, drug gangs were unfortunately shooting each other on Alberta streets long before opioids came to Canada. And when there were mandatory minimum sentences, I'm not sure you saw a tremendous drop in these things. But those are, political questions that politicians are going to, fight their way out over. So what happens on these violence questions, I think, is not a super clear answer. Toronto is going through struggles with this right now. Ottawa's had a gang violence problem in recent years. It's a real messy situation. And but he said he wants to see beefed up border security in Vancouver and things like that. And I don't think anyone's going to argue with the validity of trying to stop opioids from coming into the country.
Absolutely not. That's right. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Tyler, upgraded the Alberta government from an F, as in fail, to a B- on red tape reduction. Needless to say, Kenney and company were pleased with the announcement. Now, does this actually mean that Alberta's become a more attractive place to invest in?
Well, in theory, the same institution, the Federation of Independent Business, estimated that the compliance cost in 2017 of all the Alberta regulations was about $4.5 billion, just shy of $4.5 billion for business. So, as the theory would go, if you reduce some of this regulation, some of this burdensome red tape, you ought to be having more money with business owners to, spend on expansion or hiring new staff or what have you. So, this whole red tape reduction stuff has been things like being able to consent to be an organ donor online, to streamlining application processes. There's a whole the gamut of things in red tape reduction is just massive, and they're sort of celebrating their successes this week. So, an F to a B minus. They're improving on getting rid of the red tape. Certainly, if they want to make it to an A plus, they may have a ways to go still. And the other part of it, though, whether or not this is making Alberta more attractive, whether or not that's translating into jobs, it doesn't seem to me that we've seen for sure how many of these things are playing out just yet. So we had a corporate tax reduction as well, which you could arguably say is red tape. You have had this red tape reduction. Alberta should, in theory, be a more attractive place to do business. It should, in theory, be one of the lowest tax jurisdictions in North America. I suspect it's early days yet on whether or not this is going to have a major impact on the economy. But certainly the UCP is hoping that is going to be the case.
The UCP is also moving to a performance-based funding model for universities. Up to 15% of funding will be provided via grants and will be linked to things like graduation and filling market needs. And by 2022, that number will be going up to what, about 40%?
Yeah, so there's going to be a little bit of variation between institutions. So the criteria are going to be different, for example. So Lethbridge College might be dealing with a different set of criteria than the University of Alberta, which might be different than, SAIT in Calgary. And so the government is now going to embark on sort of these consultations to determine what criteria are best for each institution. But as you say, 15% of grant funding is going to be linked to this sort of success, and up to 40% by 2022. What that means concretely is a little bit harder to say, I think. Though the idea that education should sort of serve the interests of the economy and business is, it comes up in conservative circles, I think, quite frequently, and there's maybe a decent amount of validity to it. But, it's going to be interesting to see how some of these things end up affecting universities that have, say, robust philosophy programs or arts programs, things like that, versus technical institutes that are, funneling people into trades and places where there's, maybe more work and more directly observable impact on the economy. So, there was a lot of howling when the budget came down a few months back, and a lot of this stuff was telegraphed. So again, this, as it always sort of is with these things, I guess we'll just sort of have to see where it goes from here.
I think about my son too, when he graduated a 3-year program. This is out in Southern Ontario, as a video game developer. No jobs in the industry. He graduates, he's got this huge student loans, plural, and no jobs. So it kind of drives me nuts when I hear about universities and colleges offering these programs and there are no jobs available when you graduate. It's really sad to see. And, but I'm not alone. I mean, many parents have shared those same frustrations, and students too. Now, a story we recently had on BCN was BC's failed bid to halt the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, Tyler. The province wanted a provincial permitting system before heavy oil could be shipped through the jurisdiction, but the Supreme Court of Canada said, hey, thanks for playing, but no thanks.
Pretty much, yeah. This was sort of a gambit of John Horgan's in BC to have some provincial control over TMX, and you can say, we are going to have some say in how this pipeline works. So what it basically is, I think, going into 2020, looking ahead, is maybe some more favorable towards energy production and pipeline development. A more favorable nod, perhaps, from the Supreme Court. And the federal government obviously is saying they're doing what they can to get these things built. But it also, I think, has shifted focus a little bit in the last couple of weeks to where the bigger, perhaps, opposition is going to be. And in the case of Coastal GasLink, the pipeline, it's the Wet'suwet'en First Nation protesting. And on TMX, it could be some of the other Indigenous groups that are lobbying against it. So, there's still many balls in the air on these projects, but I think, as we talked about some weeks ago, there was shovels in the ground. There's supposed to be pipe going in the ground and all that stuff. So, maybe 2020 is going to be a little bit better of a year for pipeline expansion than, the last couple of years.
Rural Municipalities Alberta said that rural areas are hurting because of unpaid taxes from oil and gas companies. Premier Kenney says trying to recover the funds is like wringing money from a stone. And former MLA David Swan said he's not going to pay taxes himself until the energy companies pay their fair share of taxes.
Yeah, it was news to me that I could just not pay my taxes and have a bunch more in my pocket, but I guess you can. So yeah, this is an interesting one. And the idea is that municipalities, which get a lot of their revenue from property taxes involving energy companies, have not been getting this money because the companies don't have money. And the premier is sort of saying that there needs to be some collaboration between municipalities and with the provincial government, and that the solution here is to create a more business-friendly environment, get these companies working more, making more money, and then the government revenue problem via taxes sort of solves itself. So that's can't argue with that. I think that's probably true. But David Swan says, well, this is ridiculous. The premier is giving energy companies, he's letting them off the hook and paying their taxes. And so he's sort of urging a tax revolt, saying, well, if they don't have to pay taxes, well, I won't either. On that front, good luck to the former Liberal leader. I don't know how one actually does that, but that is the issue here. And as we talked about a little bit earlier on this, municipalities are facing budgeting problems, some cuts in provincial funding, things like that, and so they are noticing for sure these holes as they go into budget making season. So how each municipality comes up with solutions to this, I do not know. Time will tell. Time will tell once again, won't it?
Absolutely. Let's talk about these abandoned orphan wells. These wells we see all across the province here. There's so many of them, thousands of them, and a lot of these energy companies are just walking away, including the reclamation, being able to restore the earth. Is the province actually putting any pressure on these oil and gas companies to clean up?
Yeah, I think they have been. There was a couple big stories last year about this, and sort of saying that these wells are being abandoned, and then it becomes the responsibility of the province, the government, to clean them up. And one of the things that happened, I think late last year, maybe early this year, but I think late last year, was Premier Jason Kenney, when he was speaking in Ottawa to the federal Liberals, saying that, look, there's a business not a business opportunity. There's an economic opportunity here. If you can kick in some money, the government being responsible for reclaiming these things, we can put more Albertans back to work. So it's a little bit of a New Deal government job creation kind of thing going on. But it is true that if there is money that needs to be put into these things to clean them up, then there is money for more jobs. So that's an issue that I don't see going away anytime soon, and it's an interesting one to follow because it's very complicated, and it is not doesn't have quite the zing of some of the other things in Alberta politics, but it just keeps going along in the background here, and it is really important. And landowners are upset, municipalities are upset. There's a whole lot of people affected by this.
Now, speaking of Alberta politics, we're into a new year, 2020. Where do you see the relationship going between Premier Jason Kenney and NDP leader Rachel Notley? Lots of tension still at the ledge?
Yeah, I would say that is fair. I don't think it's going away anytime soon. I think the UCP had a lot of its sort of really contentious stuff last year, and that made for an especially acrimonious relationship between the two. There were so many things at the end of the NDP's tenure that it was so strange to watch, where they agreed with each other. They agreed on price curtailment, for example. That's the big one that comes to mind. There's quite a bit of agreement between the UCP and the NDP on some of these core questions about the economy and getting people back to work and things like that. With the UCP in government, I think those areas of common ground have deteriorated a little bit. And I think that there are some things that the UCP has done that the NDP is considerably more ideologically opposed to, perhaps, than the UCP was to some of the things the NDP did at the end of their term. That's not particularly well thought out, but that's sort of how it seemed to me. And so I think the question in 2020 is going to be, what is sort of on the docket for the UCP? And are they going to have anything coming from their backbench, like the conscience rights bill we talked about recently? Do they have some things from the backbench that are, things that many conservatives want, think people in the conservative base want, but also are sort of just the NDP loves to see those issues because they can make so much hay with them. So I think those are some of the things that I'm going to be watching over the next year to see how that relationship continues.
You know, that relationship between Kenny and Notley kind of reminds me of the Battle of Alberta. It's back again, baby.
It is. Never stops.
Yeah. Our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks for joining me today from Edmonton.
Thanks, Hal.
Last summer, the Alberta government launched a public inquiry into the finances of environmental organizations and the funding they get from foreign donors. Now, the province believes these groups are targeting the energy sector with false or misleading information. Joining me from Calgary to talk about this is Cody Battersill, founder of Canada Action, a volunteer-led grassroots movement encouraging Canadians to take action in support of the natural resources sector. Cody, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Well, recently, Eco-Justice, an environmental charity group, decided to sue the Alberta government, asking the court to stop this quote-unquote partisan political inquiry into alleged foreign-funded attacks on the oil industry. So, Cody, can you just first of all explain, what is their rationale? Why do they feel they need to intervene in this?
I'm not really too sure, and I think it's concerning because certainly if you look at the work of Vivian Krause, she has shown that Eco-Justice is one group that has in fact received a lot of money from some of these U.S. foundations, these non-Canadian based entities, to attack and to attempt to block Canadian energy infrastructure like pipelines, Trans Mountain, like LNG pipelines and projects like LNG Canada. And, we've seen obviously all of these problems in our sector, and the result is that other countries are helping fill global supply, and Canadian families are left out, and this is not good for the global environment. I think it's concerning that they've, of course they're going to want to challenge this because it seems like, according to this research, that they're actually a part of it.
Yeah, and when you look at what's happening to the Alberta economy and real life, impacting families who rely on the oil and gas industry to feed their families, yeah, it is very concerning. Now, let me just backpedal for a moment here as well. What does the Alberta government hope to accomplish, realistically speaking, with a public inquiry?
Well, at the end of the day, as Albertans, we own most of the resource, and it's the government that manages it, and then companies develop it. They lease it, they create jobs, and they pay royalties and taxes, and that pays for our quality of life, like schools and education and hospitals and first responders and emergency responders and roads, stuff that we all rely on. It's very important. So if we are not getting the best possible price for our resources because of a fear-driven campaign to block our infrastructure, to keep us landlocked, I think it is in the public good. It is in the public interest to have a clear understanding of the facts, the players, and the people behind it. We know it's very well publicized that they have been operating this campaign for more than a decade. And in their own words, they say the goal from the very beginning was to landlock Canadian oil and gas to keep us out of international markets where we would get a higher price.
Yeah, let's talk a bit more about that. Now, this is all tied into something called the tar sands campaign. Now, for any viewers who might not be familiar with that, and again, there's been some excellent research done by Vivian Krause, you mentioned her earlier. Can you explain exactly what that whole campaign is? And the fact is that they were actually quite vocal about it, even bragging about some of their accomplishments, right?
Absolutely. So going back to roughly 2008, there was a group of people that got together in the United States, and in their own words on their website where they were bragging about what they did, they mobilized and organized to block all Canadian pipelines. And in the last 10 years, they have been successful. We've seen all Canadian pipelines blocked. We have seen Canadian oil with the highest environmental standards on earth selling at the world's cheapest price, the biggest discount. And we have seen Canadian families in the energy sector and also small businesses, restaurant owners, retail owners, and our public sector all impacted because we are selling our resources at an unnecessary discount while other countries are selling their resources for the full price. And so this campaign, they brag about it. They take credit for all of the work they've done. And it's really concerning. We need to get the facts on the table. I think that is the purpose of this inquiry. And anyone who wants to have a balanced, informed, or honest conversation should be fully supportive of seeking to understand who has been behind this and the funding and the organizational structure so that as Albertans, as Canadians, we can understand who has been torquing this conversation and blocking our pipelines.
I guess one of the questions that comes out of this here, Cody, is, is this simply done for environmental reasons? And I'm sure there are some people who are passionate about the environment and who really are genuinely doing it that way. But another question that can come out of this is is it possible that there's a more self-serving profit motive behind some of this tar sands campaign here? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I can't say for certain. I don't think there's a smoking gun. But I think if you look at the facts, Keystone XL was originally proposed about 10 years ago. And Keystone XL has been blocked by all of these groups, the same groups that blocked Energy East and Northern Gateway, and they're fighting Trans Mountain and everything else. At the same time that they're fighting Keystone XL, they did absolutely nothing to oppose in a similar fashion other oil imports coming to North America, coming to the United States, coming to Canada. So Canada loses and other countries benefit. And that is the fact of the matter when you look at what's happened in the world. Global oil demand has increased by 6 or 7 million barrels per day since Keystone XL was first blocked. And the US is still importing heavy oil, but not from Canada, not oil that Canada could displace with Keystone XL. They're getting it from countries like Venezuela, Ecuador, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and other places. So, when you do look at the big picture, it's really curious that Canada has been targeted like nowhere else on Earth. And that includes ignoring oil imports coming to Canada and American tankers on the West Coast and American tankers in our waterways as well. It's really curious what they focused on and everything else that they omit.
Yeah, it is very curious. I mean, again, that's why I'm asking the question, is there a smoking gun somewhere? You got to follow the money trail. So this inquiry, in that sense, may bring some light to the matter. I mean, I don't know for sure, but are there some, who's funding this? And if those people happen to be, I don't know, let's say, possibly investing, do they have investments in the oil industry themselves, let's say in the States? And, blocking the Canadian competition, does that benefit them? I mean, I don't know for sure, but certainly within the realm of possibility, I would think. And again, as you mentioned, not targeting other countries like Saudi Arabia or Venezuela. I mean, these are states that, you want to talk about dirty oil. Well, these are human beings we're talking about, the citizens living in these countries. Wow, I mean, they are directly majorly impacted by their poor human rights record. Do we want to be buying oil from there, or do we want to be supporting clean oil, here in Canada, where we don't have those kinds of things to worry about?
We are also leading on the climate. We are taking action to reduce emissions, and there are many other countries that have higher emissions per barrel of production, that don't have the same record of investing in clean technology, that don't have the same record of clean electricity as a country, and also that don't have the same record of renewables. As Albertans and as Canadians, we can be proud. Alberta had Canada's first wind farm in 1993. We're building Canada's largest solar farm right now. But wind and solar today is not ready, according to Bill Gates, because battery storage is not technologically feasible yet. So as long as the world needs oil and gas, which will be for decades to come, we have to choose if we want to support the best producer with the highest environmental standards, or if we want to bench Canada, and that only benefits other countries, and that is bad for the environment.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like these kinds of groups seem to delight in calling Alberta oil dirty, and how pipelines will violate the rights of Indigenous peoples, for example. It's not quite like that. I mean, when you do a little bit of digging here, I mean, we see, media sound bites and so forth, but you find out there's, 400 plus, Indigenous groups across Canada, perhaps much larger. I'm not sure. You might know the numbers better than I do. But there's a lot of Indigenous groups that are quite in favor of these pipelines. It's going to be a benefit to their people. And, as long as it's done right, respecting, yes, Native rights and so forth. And again, like you point out, respecting the environment as well. I mean, I think our energy groups are bending over backwards to do their best to line up with these international standards where a lot of these other countries are not.
Yeah, and you really touch on a good point there in that, with Trans Mountain, for example, there's 94% of the Indigenous groups on the pipeline right-of-way that support the project.
94%? Are you serious?
94% on the route. With Northern Gateway, there was 70% of the groups on the route, the communities and the groups on the route that supported the project, when you do look across the country, it has been said by Indigenous leaders, there is between 400 and 500 communities of the 630 communities in total, approximate numbers, that are pro-development as partners with industry in responsible and respectful resource development, because they also want to get their communities out of poverty and they want to participate in economic and resource development. So the narrative pushed by the anti-pipeline groups, unfortunately, they will take the 6%, and that 6% can have very valid concerns, but they really highlight that 6% on Trans Mountain. They ignore the 94%. And that is not a fair or balanced conversation for the betterment of those communities and for the good of the country. That's the problem. They're only talking about the narrative that fits their anti-everything movement.
You know, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I was a Martian, if there is such a thing, you know, paying a visit to Earth, and you read the newspapers, watched the television programs, would that be the impression you'd be left with, what you just explained there, the 94% in favor? No. You'd be thinking it's the opposite, 94% against, if you watch the typical media coverage on that. It really makes you think, doesn't it? You know, one area that often does get brought up, and you know, rightly or wrongly, maybe you can explain, I don't know a lot about it, tailings ponds. And we hear that in a negative context, of course. What are these specifically, and how many of them are there? What is the environmental challenge with these?
Yeah, tailings ponds is often used as an example of where we are not leading on the environmental file, but you do have to have a more nuanced and a broader conversation. Tailings ponds are used in almost all mining operations around the world. Tailings ponds are used in those situations to help recycle water. Tailings ponds are used to store the water, and also, you know, it's been said that if you jump in a mud puddle, when you get home, you would have to rinse off. And it's also been said that if you dipped in a tailings pond, it would be a similar experience. You just want to have a quick rinse when you get home, but it's not going to kill you or poison you necessarily. So at the end of the day, we need to understand that tailings ponds are large. I don't know the total area, but they are quite large. But they are facilitating the recycling of water, and the industry is spending billions and billions and billions of dollars to expedite reclamation of tailings ponds and to continue to improve on environmental performance. Is it perfect today? Maybe not, but we can continue to work on this going forward. And that's really where we should give our industry credit. As the largest funder of all industries in Canada for clean technology and environmental protection, as a huge investor in renewables, as a partner with Indigenous communities, and we have a commitment to continually progress and improve. And that is something that cannot be said or not properly sort of equated around the world with a lot of other countries. We're really leading, and we're really trying to take responsibility. So, you know, on that one specific topic, it's really important that we are having that balanced conversation.
Yeah, another point that comes up often with these tailing ponds is when we read about, you know, ducks being killed and so forth, and nobody wants to see that. On the other hand, compared to wind energy, man, the number of birds and bats, for example, that get killed by those big blades is actually quite high. So, you know, something else to consider here as well. The federal Liberals, meanwhile, are saying that perhaps they're going to make some tweaks on the Bill C-69 and Bill C-48, now again known as the anti-oil pipeline bills, right? So now they're saying in how it's implemented, they could make some tweaks, but they're not going to change the legislation. So does this actually offer any real hope, you think?
I mean, right now, what we need to see is Trans Mountain gets built, LNG Canada moves forward. There's some other LNG projects. We need some progress on Keystone XL. Line 3 in the U.S. needs to continue to move forward. And with C-69 and with C-48, they were opposed by a lot of Indigenous communities, and they were opposed by a majority of Canadian premiers representing a large majority of the Canadian population. So we just need to continue to have conversations and try to find common ground. I'm hopeful that the new and the re-elected federal government will continue to see areas for improvement going forward so that we can bring everyone together At the end of the day, energy is our #1 export. Energy demand is going up. Oil demand and gas demand is increasing and will be around for a long time. And we are only hurting Canadian families by not making sure that we are competitive. We have, of course, seen tens of billions of dollars leave Canada for other countries, companies selling and exiting the country. This is a symptom of the broader conversation. We need to resolve some of these issues on 69 and 48, especially 48, where you have local Indigenous communities saying they were not consulted. So let's just be balanced and continue to move forward so that we can make Canada a good place to invest, which creates jobs for our families and provides for our quality of life.
Just briefly here, I mean, we are seeing significant increases in electric vehicles, green energy availability, and so forth. And we have, some political parties telling us that their goal is to shut down the oil industry. But, going by what you're saying here, there is still a lot of global demand out there that is in need of Canadian oil and gas. And so looking, a decade or two down the road, you think there's enough to keep Alberta oil going?
Absolutely there is, because electric vehicles, everything in our modern world comes from the earth, and you can't make an electric vehicle without oil and gas. Even if it's not directly powered by oil and gasoline, you still need oil and gas and petrochemicals to make it. Also, even if there's a recent model I saw where it said if all of the world's vehicles went electric by 2040, oil demand would still be above 90 million barrels per day. And as long as that's the case, Canada should be the last producer out of the pool, because oil makes a lot of things possible and directly manufactures a lot of things in our modern lives, not just gasoline for vehicles. You have, you look at airplanes, right? There's no replacement today for jet fuel. Heavy trucks and heavy industry. There's a lot of things that we can continue to do that are very reliant on oil and gas. And natural gas, a great example where we can export Canadian natural gas to the world and reduce global emissions. That's why we need to build LNG facilities. We have the cleanest, greenest natural gas on earth. We have the best people working. We have the best standards. We are environmental leaders, and we need to be proud. We need to stand up for that balanced conversation.
A lot of time. Thank you so much for your expertise on this, Cody.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, Cody Battersill, founder of Canada Action. And on behalf of all of us at BCN, thanks so much for watching.